Good evening. Welcome to DeFacto Review, a weekly roundup of news and current affairs here in Mongolia, with our commentator, economist, and columnist, Jargal DeFacto.
Good evening.
And I'm Anand Tumurtaga. We are live on Facebook on MNB World, and you can join in the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag Jargal_DeFacto. Today in our program, 2 businessmen were arrested for having a connection with the former prime minister by his corruption allegations. The tugrik depreciated by 8.9% last year, and there seems to be no sign of slowing down. Investigations are taking place into the State Bank of Mongolia for being a conduit for money laundering. So let's move on to our first topic. On Friday, the Independent Authority Against Corruption temporarily detained 2 businessmen. One of them was the founder and shareholder of Petrovis, the biggest petroleum importer in Mongolia, and tugrik. The 2 were being investigated for having connections with the former Prime Minister Bayir and his connections with Oyutalga agreement during the 2009 agreement signing between Mongolia and Oyutalga. So can you tell us what do you think was the reasoning behind these arrests, and why arrest them now, not before?
Well, before we go into these particular cases, I would like to point out that it's very hard now in Mongolia, becoming very hard to make a business in general, in particular in 3 sectors like mining and what has to do with the real estate, land ownership, and in banking. It looks like a lot businesses themselves want to be either a lawmaker or maybe executive minister, etc. And in particular, when the high-ranking political officials are making pressure on businesses, racketeering kind of. We will talk about one case later. So altogether makes very hard to run business. And in particular, this sort of wrongdoings usually comes on the media, but slowly disappear for many reasons. And that's why in Mongolia, the businesses and the politicians got together, and it's now very hard to separate. That makes bad governance, and bad governance create corruption. And that's what these arrests you are talking about is of one of those series. In general, I should also point out that there was, in 2017, there was 106 cases, files that the anti-corruption agency suggested to go to the court, but out of them only 46 of these files finally decided at the court. Well, what happened in 2018? It was twice more files, 224, but out of which only 37% or 84 cases went to the court. So the question is, what happened with the rest? And nobody is informing about that. And this is our general prosecutor's job, that they need to inform us why so many files don't go, criminal cases don't go to the court. Tell us what is the reason. Otherwise,
tell us why is the reason behind that.
That gives me this conclusion that the businesses and money or politicians are get so much closer. Either them, many of them were arrested, like the 2 cases, 48 hours, and after this 48 hours, either some of them are detained for another 1 month by our law, by the permission of the prosecutor. And so that gives the reason gives us to think something wrong with this our judicial system.
But is it because the judicial system is wrong, or maybe they made some kind of concession to the general prosecutor, maybe giving them some information about some corruption allegations, maybe?
Could be. Mr. Derdlikju, for example, this is the case where the Gazant chair was arrested by Mr. Baysalang last week.
Yes, Mr. Derdlikju, our former general prosecutor, was detained for using his own powers and extorting other people's for money.
The person who gave money was himself on air on another channel, and he said that Derdlikju asked him $10 million racketeering or kind of disregarding his criminal file. So he had asked $10 million, and the Rambold says, Mr. Rambold, who owns the Altendornot mining company, gold mining company,
yes,
he bought from Russians. It looks like the Russians had also a debt, so all these things to be neglected or deleted from the case. The prosecutor general asked him $10 million, out of which he paid $5 million and $4 million. $4 million goes to his brother account in Holland Bank, and other 5 goes to another two accounts. He says a driver and assistant of the Mr. Baisagalan, both employees of the bank. They have raised. Their account have been used, and the total $9 million. Mr. Dardukju got it. That's the blame he is saying, and his life he's on the Mr. Rambold.
Yes.
And then the question comes: how come that the CEO of that time of commercial bank can do the sort of wrongdoing, helping a high-level official receiving bribe from a company? So if it is true, of course he must have a responsibility. If he's not, then the guy who is saying that must have a responsibility.
Yes.
The other case of Mr. Davanyam, you said Petrovis is the largest petroleum importer in the country. What happened was 2010 when this Mongolian Mining Corporation, MMC, of Energy Resource was listed in Hong Kong Bank, and they raised over $600 million US.
Yes.
And they 11.4% was of these shares were owned by Petrovis. And later in 2 years, the Petrovis they changed their name into not the company but 3 owners. They have some debate, and they divided company, Petrovis company, or all the shareholders to the private individuals. And it turned out that they sold 2.4% of the shares of 11.4, and looks like the price was good, some around 70, they say, plus $1 million they have raised on this just selling of 2% and 4%. And this money looks like were abroad, they brought to the country, and somehow this money and Mr. Bayar ownership of real estates in America, it turned out, according to the information in the media.
So you're saying that Mr. Bayar and Davanyam were in cahoots at the time. They were colluding and to do this kind of corrupt dealings when the agreement was happening between Oyutla.
I don't know the connection of Mr. Bayar with this agreement, but all this thing happening, many things happening in this country after the largest project started, signed the contract with OT, and the country received more money than anybody could dream. All right.
Yes. Yes.
And that time the decision makers are somehow being related with that. That's the claim comes around, but it is to be approved. But however, the real estate case of Mr. Bayer happened after that, after 2012, and these real estates turned out was on the name of Mr. Davanyam, and this real estate went to the children of Mr. Bayer. I don't think it's because he loves so much Bayer and gives many real estates in the U.S. So in both cases, you see, one case is related to the former prime minister. The other case is a former prosecutor general. So this shows that's the reason why we have a full basis to say that it's corruption.
So recently, the Independent Authority Against Corruption has been very active, and they've been prosecuted. They've been saying there's some corruption allegations. They've been detaining a lot of former businessmen and also former politicians. Why the recent rapid activity in the? Is it linked to the president wanting to replace the general prosecutor? Maybe.
All things go to that directions. But logically, if you see
general director, I'm sorry.
If they, first of all, they are removing the speaker, and they could not do it, but they made special law amendments so that they can, by majority of parliament members, they can release him or get him resigned. But however, that's what's happening next week. By Tuesday, we must have a new speaker. I think the parliament cannot go without the speaker, somebody who is running the sessions. But the issue is coming. If the new speaker will bring the issue of change or replacement or change of the head of the anti-corruption agency, or maybe also general prosecutor, etc. So that's what the people are expecting for all last 2 months. Why? Really, many corrupt cases are disappearing. As we said, 1/3 is only go to the court, 2/3 is disappearing.
And the general director maybe sees that he might also lose his job, and before he loses his job, maybe he's trying to do as much as he can.
General prosecutor, you mean?
Yes, yes.
One may say that we have the basis to say that. We will see what happens next week. However, what is sure that Mongolia need to combat all these corruption cases. But the other thing is sure that those people who is combating, they were creating these conditions or cases. So many criminal cases, corruption, large cases have just made silent. So in particular, for example, the Small Medium Enterprise Support Fund.
Yeah.
And just wondering, people, your state leaders are misusing your money, which is supposed to help your business. And they are misleading, stealing, and they're making into the turn of their non-bank financial institutions, and Mongolians yet silence and sitting and watching. Just we had 2 demonstrations, just for 2 days, very organized demonstrations, but looks like Mongolians have still to learn to fight against corruption, to participate in public governance.
That's a very sad note to end on that. And moving on to our next topic, the tugrik depreciated by 8.9% last year. And even though the central bank reserves have reached $3.5 billion, last year the tugrik depreciated, as I said, 8.9%. And we have around like 570 million loans was repaid with interest. And the economy has grown to a certain extent. But the central bank explains that this economic rebound is thanks to the increase of consumer goods and consumer loans. And basically, the leading reduction of consumer loans has reached to 30 months starting from this year. Do you agree with the fact that we're spending more? We're spending more than what we are actually earning?
Yes, I do. Not only at the level of the whole country. At the level of companies, at the level of private individuals, we always somehow, our expenditure always exceeding our revenues. And it is shown in particular, for example, the growth of our import last year, almost 40%. You know, what is interesting? Okay, economy is extending and it's understandable. But however, the consumer loan also has extended or grown at the same level, almost 40%. The impression is that Mongolians are increasing their consuming by increasing their loan, personal loan, which creates unhealthy situation in the country because, very interestingly, because the people were afraid of, I mean, the central bank, for example, is afraid of Mongolian people spending too much money compared to their revenue. So they have put special restrictions on the ratio of your revenue and your payment for the credit. It should be 70% of things maximum should go for payment of your credit. 30% you need to stay with you. It stays with you, otherwise you are not sustainable. You cannot support your life. That's first made that this restriction this year. In general, we keep borrowing more. The country, and the whole country now has a private and public debt altogether is $27.9 billion US dollar.
Yes.
So we are in debt. First, secondly, we pay more interest rates than the money comes to the country. That's why our exchange rate almost 9%. Depreciation of Mongolian tugriks only this year. And it's combined with 9% of inflation. Together really makes our economic progress which we see 6.6% of GDP growth last year. But this is it's going neglecting that growth. That's the problem.
But then how can we basically fix this? Do you know, like, how can we like sustain this growth? How can we have an increased fixed income basically then?
Well, it's like any normal economy, which has normal economy. I mean, it's about 2% or less inflation rate is okay.
For ours?
Yeah, for ours it's 9% already. With the exchange rate, 9% is almost now. Banking interest rate is now this year. By the way, they say 2% less, a percentage point less, 18%. 18% to the consumer loan, and 15.5% to business loan. So average 70.2. The central bank governor was informing that. He was informing, but still it's a lot, 18%. And the 9% you have inflation. So the real income for those who saving money it's about less than 10%. So that's why we should decrease the interest rate in the country first. Second, we should have less money to pay for what we have borrowed. The 60% GDP equivalent of foreign debt of the government is still very high.
Yes.
So we need to decrease it. For that, we need to decrease also, very paradoxical. We need more money to pay debt, but on the other hand, we should not increase our tax. And tax revenue this year was, for the last year, first time exceeded what they were expected, 25% or so than planned. And first time the country had no deficit. But whether it's good or not for the economy, you said, not very good, because when the government increases taxes from the private companies, the money is supposed to go for extension of that business.
Yes.
Right?
But doesn't Mongolia have a fixed tax system though? Isn't that what's like hurting us? As you said, we need to increase tax. Maybe change to a marginal
We
tax.
don't need to increase the tax, but our rate is not changing. All 10%, revenue, profit,
Yes,
all this, only 10%. Only, I say. I'm saying only, because it is not only. Because all combined, altogether, tax burden is level of 45, 46% in Mongolia. And plus this high interest, high loan credit rate, 18%, as I said. So altogether combined, where is such a business, you pay 40% to the government, 20% to the bank. So it's very hard. That's one of the reasons why our economy is not becoming vibrant, why the economy is only dependent on mining sector. In order to have normal economy, we should have also competition. Only where is the competition, there is more.
But then, how can maybe the government have a system where there's more competition, like give more opportunities to have competition and increase competition?
The state should not be that big as now. First, second, how you can compete with the company of your minister, for example.
Yes.
Conflict of interests.
Yes.
Public government and the business should be separate. Third, state-owned enterprises. They keep increasing it, and there's so bad management. And we will talk later on in the case of a state bank about that bad management. Government should be less in such a particular country like Mongolia, where the public governance is so bad. So, but good thing is we are now discussing about that, and we know where is exactly the issue. And by the way, this marriage of businesses and government is coming from the secrecy of the political party financing, which is taboo. Nobody talks about that. In fact, they are creating a corruption in the society, which makes it impossible to compete, which impacts on the competitiveness of Mongolian companies.
This also ties in with the estimated development fund scandal, right?
Oh yes, of course. That's the clear example where the government is misusing our money. The other thing, why the interest rate is so high also, it turned out our total credit in the banking system of the country is only 47% of total asset of the bank. The same figure, the 47% now, but it was 60% 9 years ago, in 2010. So out of all banking assets, only 60% were using that time for credit. Now it's only 47%. So the question, why it is decreasing, the business loan? It's expensive. It's now, by the way, the increase of bad loan. 10% of the total loan is now bad loan. Why? And out of this 10%, half of them has to do with the loan given to constructing companies. These residences that are not sold. Many real estates now are on the market. Nobody is buying. So the question is, something wrong with this bank regulations? And that's that brings me to the point where we have this artificial mortgage loan, 8%, while the market is 18% interest rate. And this 8% is not only, that 8% is giving hope for construction companies to sell their properties. But those who can buy already have apartments. And the apartments we have now, residences, are way expensive than people can afford. That's one of the reasons why the Ger district population is not decreasing.
Yes.
That's the reason why air pollution is not going down, vice versa, it's going up, more polluted. So that's all this thing.
Then what can the government do to regulate this, as you said, into for the development of like buildings and sorts?
Best thing is government should not intervene into the businesses. They should not create some utopian programs. That's impossible. Government have been doing a lot price stabilization program. No single price is stabilized in the society today. But they spend billions of tugriks. And many of them we don't have a report, by the way. So by the name of saving the people, our public officers are misusing our fund. And we believe that they are saying the truth and that everything will be changed. Yes, it is changed into the worse. So that's why, exactly to point to your question, is less government, more transparency, and more competition, and no whatsoever control of price by the government.
That's okay. Moving on from that, also talking about not having a big government. The central bank, not the central bank, sorry, the state bank. There was a report that the director of the state bank, has been being investigated for issuing 2 billion tugriks.
20 billion.
20 billion tugriks, sorry, with a low interest rate. And the financial minister also confirmed that the 20 billion tugriks was given out. And these monies were given out to companies such as the Chinese company.
Xinjiang Xinfa.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Has there been any real substantial evidence that these monies were actually laundered through the state bank, maybe?
That's one of the reasons he is detained. And by the way, about the state bank. State bank was created on 3 or so bankrupt commercial banks.
Yes, exactly.
So, to save the interests, they just put together, one by one, by the way, and they called it state bank. And because it's state bank, because it's owned by the Mongolian government, it means nobody owns it, actually. That's why they put 20 vice presidents to the bank, which each has a couple $1,000 salary. So then recently they have moved it, they changed the structure. Now the new things are starting. This Xinjiang Xinfa,
yes,
as 20 billion tugriks loan was given without proper collateral, first.
Yes.
Second, the other thing, what is on media. It turned out they were helping somebody buying real estate in countryside, in remote areas, with very artificial, very small price. Say, there's even case, $150 million actually they paid for the asset, the building, but they bring the asset like 10 times more value, 1.5 billion tugriks I have asset, so now you give me a loan. Once it is orchestrated by the bank itself, the bank is giving me now 80.
So the banks are valuing the asset as more than as it is then, basically, like.
Yeah, no, mostly the borrower coming is suggesting 10 times more price that actually he bought. Bank knows that, but knowingly they accept his high price, 1.5 billion tugrik asset, and now I have a right. If I was the guy, it's 70% of this asset I can borrow money. So I'm borrowing from you now what, 800 million US dollar, 8 million tugrik. My collateral is that old building, and I disappear. Then what you do? I say, well, look, business is bad, blah blah, and now you take the collateral, which is 10 times less actually the value.
Yes.
And who is taking the risk? All the people of the bank shareholders, right?
Yes,
shareholders.
yes.
But in case of state bank, it is shareholders government.
Yes. So it's basically the people, basically.
Yeah, basically we pay for the loss. That's what's happening with the state bank, and that's a very clear example how Mongolian state runs businesses. And now they will disappear. These people, maybe the case will disappear, but then the new at the next election there will be newcomers who will be running their businesses. That's very unfortunate situation. This is a real money laundering issue here. That's why, according to the central bank governor, Mongol Bank is now under very intense watching list of the anti-laundering, anti-money laundering institutions. We are on that list till the October this year.
But why do you think that these people see these risks, right? They see that Mongolia is on these, as you said, on the money laundering list. But why take the risk of
under
doing
the
this corrupt
intense watch list?
Yes, intense watch.
Final decision will be made in October this year.
But I understand that these people probably know that. They probably know that. But why take the risk though? Why do this?
Well, because they don't care. As soon as their personal wealth is coming, they themselves help in money laundering and taking their own risk. They're doing no risk. They are just misusing our fund, and then they will disappear. A new political party comes, like many times, many things before. So, unfortunately, these people don't care about the government, about the state, about us. They just do care only of themselves, their personal money. Unfortunately, but good thing is you and me discussing about that. A good thing is it's supported by people, by Mongolians, and who wants to have a good government, and they will make their decisions in the ballot.
On that note, like, can you maybe give us how can we maybe fix this system? Like, what can we do to fix this system and have less corruption and maybe less money laundering to our own banks, maybe?
The bigger thing is governance issue. Democratic system provides this opportunity. Two things. One, you go to election. The other thing is, it's just one day happening. But in between election, there are 364 days a year, right?
Yes.
So or 4 years even sometimes. In between the election, you participate in watching the democratic government, which we don't do, unfortunately. And we are somehow, as individuals, we agree somehow by silence with this wrongdoing, which is destroying our future and the business opportunity. And as a result, they go to Korea. That's the whole issue. People are running away, and we should discuss about that more openly so that we don't have these problems. And good thing is, I hope that our today's dialogue is helping to solution of the problems. How we can have a solved problem if we don't discuss it. So good thing is, we discuss it.
Okay. Well, I hope that happens too also. Well, on that note, this is the end of our program. Well, that's all the time we have for today, and thanks for watching DeFacto Review on MMB World, and we will see you next week on MMB World.
Goodbye. One is the fund of